Good evening and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV, your trusted source for bold and informed conversations on politics, policy and governance. I'm Shafi'u Suleiman. Tonight, we focus on a looming threat that could affect millions of Nigerians: floods. The federal government has issued a sobering focus for 2025. 31 out of 36 states, including FCT, are at risk of flooding. The data is alarming. 1,249 communities across 176 local government areas face high-risk exposure, while over 2,100 others are in 293 LGAs are marked as moderately vulnerable. This chilling projection comes just days after a devastating flood in Mokwa, Niger State, claimed more than 200 lives and displaced thousands. A grim reminder that climate threats are no longer distant possibilities. So what's driving these patterns and how prepared are we? Joining us to unpack the causes, consequences and urgent interventions needed is Dr. Yusuf Rigasa, an environmental expert. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Right, okay, let's go straight into the conversation now. Flooding, a yearly occurrence in Nigeria. It's not even yearly now, perhaps going by the level of climate change. There's what is now called the flash floods. So we've seen the effect. Just recently, in Mokwa, over 200 people have been killed, lost their lives as a result of such flood. Now, many are still finding it difficult to understand why this is happening. Before now, Nigerians knew that, until maybe at the tail end of the raining season, before we begin to see this rising level of waters. How can you explain to a layman, reasons behind some of these changes?
Yeah, when we look at the climate change impact, one of the impact is that it results in change in weather, and part of it is that the rain cycle sometimes shifts. If you look at the rains, we have been expecting rain for over 2-3 months now. The rains are just beginning, at least in Abuja, as well as in Kaduna. Most part of the north, they experienced their first rain last month. So, and part of the impact of the shifting of the rain cycle, or maybe the contraction of rainfall, is that you have a lot of rain that is supposed to fall maybe in a month. You may have it in a day. And as such, government agencies such as NISA and NIMET, that is why they normally give projections. They identify vulnerable areas and communities, and give out an early warning to those particular, component of the society, so that they can be prepared against emergency, if at all the emergencies at least manifest, as in the case of Mokwa. And what Mokwa actually shows, though we need to sympathize with those impacted and affected by the flood, but what it actually signifies is that there is a failure of the emergency response system in the country. So you have to blame the local government, you have to blame the state, and you have to blame
emergency in terms of rescue.
In terms of yes, rescue is part of it, but the response starts from first the early warning system. We have a very good early warning system because the projections have been given. You have already rolled out the statistics, and that shows that that system is actually working. But then the other component of the emergency response mechanisms, they have failed, because what we are seeing is that they have failed to prevent the flash flood in Mokwa, and probably and sadly, maybe more are going to come.
Right. We look at the factors, but then, just like you rightly mentioned, the federal government says it has already, put out this early warning signs, and map out even the areas that are likely going to be affected. Mokwa is one of those areas. Like in Niger, you talked about 19 local government areas are likely going to be affected, and Mokwa is inclusive. Now, so what that means is perhaps the authorities have at their fingertips, this early warning. But then there hasn't been, proactive response, if you like, or proactive measure to avert it from these devastating consequences. there are quite a number of factors, I understand. You know, we're talking about the failure of the authorities now. There are also issues around ecology, you know, around the environment itself, you know, lack of adequate drainage system and all of that. So why is this happening? Why is this allowed to happen? And we have authorities that are in charge, and then monies are being invested, or rather channeled towards that. Take, for instance, the ecological fund, which the federal government is setting aside specifically to address some of these concerns.
Well, if you look at ecological fund per se, for me, it's not a fund that is dedicated to emergencies. We have NEMA.
Right.
And yes, ecological funds can be used to address emergencies, but what we are seeing is the failure of that emergency response mechanism. Yes, once the early warning systems have been released, what you expect is the buy-in of the state and then a proactive response from state and local government. Now, it would be nice to hear, you know, the response of Niger state government as well as the management of Mokwa local government. What have they been doing with this, or what have they done
with the information at their disposal?
Early warning that was delivered by NESA. So, and in most cases, negligence has become part of it, but what we are beginning to see is because maybe state and local government officials, they love to, their attention is now more focused on the federal intervention when this kind of events happen. It's
So maybe it can be allowed to happen deliberately so as
that is what we are beginning to see. Is like most officials at state and local government level, you know, their eyes is they don't focus on putting in the mitigations and the necessary, you know, adaptations as part of the preparedness. Their eyes have been overtaken by the interventions that may actually come from federal government. Well, it's just a science that we are beginning to see.
At the expense of people's life, because we, you know, talking about this is what cannot be replaced. Over 200 people, you know.
That is why I'm trying to say that we need to investigate such matters, and where the government finds negligence of people, you know, people are negligent of their responsibilities. Such people should be punished. We shouldn't be repeating this kind of cycles every year, flood, as if we don't have the structures and the necessary legal framework to do it. We have the necessary legal framework. The National Flood and Erosion Policy regulations are already have been, I think, over 20 years. But are they being implemented the way they should be? The local government taking their responsibilities seriously when it comes to flood mitigation and other aspects of environmental performance? What are the roles of the state government and the ministries of environment and other stakeholders at the state level doing to ensure that when these warnings are issued, you know, adequate preparations are made against these kind of emergencies?
Now, okay, understanding the flood itself, you know, because it's also key. Just like I said earlier, people are used to flooding at the end of you know, the rainy season and what have you. At that point, you have intense rainfall and all of that. But this one happened, you know, flash floods. Yes. People need to understand how it normally happens, and if it happens, you know, what needs to be done. For instance, looking at the map, you know, the stretch of the area that was affected, you know, it cut across the community. So, and then the water level. Now, federal government said it is not any release of Java or whatever dam. Those dams are intact. But then you can see the volume of this water, quite huge and devastating. How does this happen?
Yes, I think part of when I was watching the video that you are showing, one of the things that I realized is that either the drains have been blocked completely so that the water has no way
access,
no way to escape, or people have built in barriers to prevent the water from, you know, moving the way it should be. So, of course, drainage are very important. If you don't have functional drainage system, what you do have is ponding, and when the rainfall is heavy, you have flash flood. Yes, we have seen a lot of it flowing because when you block the drainages, you know, from doing the functions that they have to do, the water will have to find its own way. And
no one stops the
yes,
water.
that's what happened in the case of Mokwa, and you can see drainages are carrying water beyond their natural capacities. That was the reason why they were building houses. Those who built houses along the streams, they did so believing that they were safe, unknown to them that other drains have been blocked. Now, that's what we saw under the bridge. That became the only drainage system available for the rain in that community. And that was why this damage happened. People were in their homes, people were on their beds, and before you know, they were carried away and they died in the process. And
unfortunately,
of course, we have planning authorities even in Mokwa. Mokwa is an old town, it's not a new village, it's a very ancient settlement, and I believe that that place has been mapped and they have a strong, a robust administrative structure, especially when you come to these issues of Dubagari. They were strong in those days in those
sanitation
officers. So all these urban planning, officials, when you combine them with the responsibility of these environmental health officers, they ought to have seen the signs before what happened. Now it's up to them to up their game and ensure that this is not repeated in any other community.
Right. I understand the Nigerian authorities are also talking about the need to create a pathway, for collecting this excess rainfall, for instance, the volume. Still is part of the drainage. They need to have a comprehensive drainage arrangement. But the fact that, this is not just limited to Mokwa or to Niger State. If you look at the scale of the concern, we're talking about 31 states, including the FCT, making 32. Only 5 states are said to be out of, this
vulnerability.
This vulnerability. I think Kaduna, Kano, Katsina, Ekiti, and Enugu. Apart from these states, all others, fall in, except that there is level, some are high risk and so are moderately risk. So looking at the magnitude of this, and earlier you were talking about the framework, the policies, the national policies.
There is a national policy.
Shouldn't this be a national emergency, for instance, looking at the devastation that it came with?
Well, at a point in 2012, flood was considered that year as a national emergency, and you can see that very year, the federal government, state and local government working together, and there was a significant intervention. There was a presidential intervention committee, I think chaired by Dangote, and I believe T.Y. Danjuma. Money was realized, but how this money was invested in flood mitigations and adaptations, I don't really know. State need to go back to the drawing table and map out their areas of risk and put up the necessary mitigations and adaptations. Flash floods can even happen, outside the areas of risks and vulnerability, because
there can be an effect from elsewhere.
Yes, it can still happen. The vulnerability is based on certain variables, but flash flood is an environmental disaster that can happen anywhere, anytime, even in countries that are far more advanced.
I've seen this happening in Bangladesh, in India, and quite a number of
so it's
Asian
not something
countries.
you don't negotiate that with nature. It can happen, but where you are warned and you have been given protection, you have no excuse to allow this kind of emergencies to happen.
Right. Okay. Now, looking at, because, just recently, I remember we're here talking about this similar incident in Borno.
Yes.
At the point it happened, and you are making reference to the fact that there is need for a comprehensive kind of arrangement or master plan to address those shortfalls in terms of infrastructure. Governments must take this a priority, make it a priority. And you are even citing an example with Kaduna, for instance, at some point, what the governor did, to address some. How do you think this will help mitigate, some of this challenges?
Some governments actually don't have, how can I say, priorities, a list of priorities.
Right.
So, but Erufai, if you look at him, Erufai at some point, urban renewal was his priority, and you could see how he was developing Kafanchan, Zaria, and Kaduna Metropolis. All of them were part of that urban renewal project. So all other states, as well as local governments, they are supposed to identify areas of risk and build this flood mitigation,
mechanism,
infrastructure, such that when if you look at Abuja, you hardly see ponding. Even if you are driving out on a rainy day, typical rainy day, you hardly see rain ponding along the roads, because not that the drains are excellent, but they are fairly good, because they are able to mitigate, the current challenges. Even in Abuja, we need to expand, flood controls, within the city. So state government and the local government, they need to actually conduct what I call flood vulnerability studies or flood risk assessment in their own domains, and bring out the necessary, the need, and combine it with the need assessment, so that they can be able to at least present these needs to the states, and where there is fund, the state should fund it. And where the states are not buoyant enough, they should be able to confidently come to the federal government in Abuja and say, look, these are the infrastructure we need, and this is the cost. Now, the federal government may decide to maybe give them half of the money or the whole money if funds are available. But where even we don't have such funds in the national coffers, the federal government can now go to development partners. That is why they exist, where we have, the potentials for environmental disasters. And if you, just like in health, vaccination, some of these vaccines are not actually produced in Nigeria. They come from development partners.
Donor agencies.
Yes, donor agencies. So it's the same thing that conducts a need assessment. What are the infrastructure that you need? What are the financial requirements? Do you have the technical competence? And then where you know that you are deficient, your deficiency shouldn't be in you not doing what you are supposed to do, you being negligent of your responsibility. Your deficiency should be in terms of resources. You don't have enough resources. But if you have enough resources, every local government and every state government should know what to do. The job of federal government is to provide standards, that if you want to build this structure, this is the standard. And where there is
but the standards are there, just like you said, it's about implementation or enforcement.
Well, enforcement, this is what I've been talking about in various fora. When with the decline of local government, what happened to environmental performance is that environmental health officers are no longer as relevant as they used to be. And these are people that move from house to house, from community to community, identify environmental health risks, including the risks of flash floods, and then prescribe mitigations at family level. That is to say that, okay, your drainage system has been clogged. Go and
fix it.
Yes. Not quite long ago, in Hausaland, we used to have Aichingaya, where
community work,
where people come together to either go and clean the cemetery, go and open
the channels,
open drainage systems, and do some discharge some communal environmental responsibilities. But all of a sudden now, you don't see that kind of communal cohesion or engagement anymore. Then that means that the system is actually failing in that aspect.
Right. Okay. Now talking about collaboration, because it's very critical. Government, the central government has to lead the pack. If I understand what you're talking about. But then some would say it's also a matter of priority. Now that we're having these disasters at our backyard, we've seen Mokwa. Nobody knows where it will happen elsewhere. We're not praying for that. But shouldn't this elicit, or rather prompt the central government to say, okay, we have an emergency at hand, and there is need for all of us to come together. For now, some will say, if in these countries that are serious, there should be some sort of, high-level meetings, talking about what needs to be done and how it can be done to address, proactively address these happenings. But then nobody seems to be beyond just issuing the warnings and then the sympathizing with the victims. We haven't seen such.
No, if you look at it at the federal level, we have seen the federal delegation paying a visit to the impacted area. And of course, I think last week or so, there was some funds put aside for flood awareness campaign, to be conducted by several federal agencies. These are all good measures. But as I mentioned earlier, I would love to hear from the Niger State government, what have they done? And then from other states that are have been identified as vulnerable. So what are they doing?
Especially those at the high risk.
Yes, because what happened in Mokwa is a wake-up call to them that this thing could have happened in Sokoto, it could happen in Kasina, it could happen in Jigawa, especially Jigawa. So what is Jigawa doing? We don't want to hear any other community, suffering from the same fate as smoker. So this is a wake-up call for every environmental expert, the Ministry of Environment, Federal Ministry of Environment. I believe that ministry needs more empowerment, so that the minister can call everybody, sit down, let's analyze this challenge. I believe that the Ministry of Water Resources is equally involved. The Ministry of Aviation, that's when you come to this NIMET projection.
Predictions,
so all the stakeholders, they need to come together and find out what are the challenges, what are the gaps in our system that allow these kind of things to happen. And then when they do happen, then how do we actually mitigate the sufferings of the impacted environment as well as the impacted citizens and communities?
Right. Okay. Yeah, we will talk about, handling the humanitarian crisis that come with it. But then looking at the triggers, yes, we identify, climate change and how it affects, the environment. But it's a global phenomenon. And we're seeing how other countries are taking it, through various ways. Even the early warning system or the alert system, we've seen in developed countries. When something is about to happen, people are alerted to evacuate immediately. But in our case here, people are just there, and before you know it, you find children, women, and all of that sweeping and then taken away by flood.
The gap is that the early warning system is excellent, but the preparedness is weak.
Okay.
And the citizens and community response mechanisms are equally non-existent. That is why things like this are happening. You have an excellent role being played by federal government and its agencies, but the states, instead of them to use this early warning system to fully prepare for such emergency. When you go to state, I remember when I was in Kaduna, we were conducting what we call drills, mimicking, simulating a real flood situation so that we test the response capacities of all stakeholders in government and out of government. But now in most states, if you go, the ministries of environment are not empowered. And we have a situation where local government are weak financially and technically. And these environmental health officers that are supposed to enforce environmental compliance at community and citizens level, you don't actually see them. So how do we move forward? There's limit to what the federal government can do. This is not a federal challenge. This is
a national challenge.
This is a challenge particularly to states and local government. Yes, as I mentioned, the federal government has a policy, it has a regulation, it has standards, and to a large extent, it has the funding. But when a state is sleeping on an environmental risk,
or is rechanneling the funds?
Yes.
Because if there are funds, meant to address some of this environmental challenges like the ecological ones we are talking about, quite a number of times you find out that they are being diverted for something else rather than what it is meant for. Erosion control, for instance, and all of that.
Erosion control is very important. It was started by NUMA. Now we have another government agency called ACRISAL, and these are agencies that are well funded. And I believe that they have been doing their work, in conjunction with states. But the challenge, the problem is that if you are driving certain, erosion control projects without engaging the communities as well as in local government and as well as certain MDAs in state and NGOs, what you find out that you are just working for yourself, because the communities may feel that they don't own this kind of project and may refuse to actually key in. So the benefit expected from such projects may end up being limited or even non-existent. So it's good.
You have to carry the people along.
You have to carry the people along. It's just like giving out a contract for construction of toilet here in Abuja, for a toilet to be constructed in Ilela or Sapele, and then the people in Sapele will just wake up one day and see a toilet, and then you are giving them the key. So they will start wondering, did you actually build a toilet, or what did you actually put in there for them? So such kind of things we need to, because with this policy of Mr. President, Nigeria first, it doesn't actually mean that, if you look at it holistically, Nigerians should be given the right of first refusal. But then if you are doing something for the community should be given the right of first refusal. Let them build their infrastructure themselves.
That way perhaps they will value it more and then protect it and make sure that it remains functional. Okay, still talking about, what needs to be done. I mean, the climate change is here with us, and it's still happening.
It's a reality.
It's a reality. We are seeing the effects. And there are key players in all of this. We were earlier talking about, stakeholders in regulation, stakeholders in, emergency response and all of that. But looking at factors also contributing to this climate change, how much of prevention are we doing in that aspect here in Nigeria, for instance? Quite a number of countries have phased out, certain, perhaps maybe vehicles we are running, those with gas emissions, industrial pollution and all of that. There are mitigation mechanisms. But here, it's left open. Everyone does what he likes.
In climate change management, there is something called greenwashing, where people actually stake a claim that is not actually true, but it may look like the real thing. I think part of the challenge of Nigeria is that the funding for climate change mitigation is not actually there. But we know our areas of vulnerability, especially the one that we are discussing today. Climate change primarily it is not being caused by the activities of developing countries. It is the developed countries that actually drive this phenomena.
How? They are not industrialized. They don't have the capacity to pollute.
Well, if you may look at it, the industrial revolution started from the developed countries. We are still a developing nation. Nigeria is not, nobody considered us as a developed country.
Right.
And when you look at industrialization, and even our transport industry is still underdeveloped. Even if you look at the rate of consumption, with all these challenges that we are facing with fossil fuel, the rate at which we consume per capita is by far lower than what is obtainable in developed countries. So what Nigeria and other countries have been doing is to try to convince the developed countries to actually provide the necessary capital and technical competence.
And quite a number of them are cutting costs. The United States, for instance, Trump has been, very emphatic about that. Reducing costs, pulling out of those climate change agreements and all of that.
But that's the only way forward for humanity. That because we are not very strong technically and financially, those that are already ahead of us, they need to partner with us to ensure that at least we mitigate the impact in our own environment. After all, the world is only one, and there is no boundary in terms of air, soil, and other environmental component. It is one world, one people. That is the way we are. So whatever impacts or affects Nigeria ultimately may turn out to affect, other countries in the world. So maybe some of them feel comfortable the way things are, but the reality that at some point it will down on us. Even they are facing more hurricanes, more floods, flash floods, and they are all going to be much more serious than us. The only thing that is amplifying our own,
and all of that.
The only thing that amplifies the impact here probably is because we are poor. Even in the place that this thing happened in Mokwa, those that were impacted were probably poor and deprived people. Rich people don't go and build, structures in areas of vulnerability. That is our reality.
All right. Okay. You're talking about the human factors, because we cannot continue to talk about it without also pinpointing where the people are at fault. Human factor. We've seen people blocking, water systems.
Yes.
And all of that, and when it comes, when the devastation comes, it affects them naturally.
Poor and the vulnerable.
Yes, and they are also seeing, at community level, people are seeing how these things are happening, but then there wouldn't be much commitment to say no, we're doing harm to ourselves. There's need for us to. You earlier talked about the community efforts, to clear the drainage systems and all of that. Part of the challenge, as you rightly put, was also the fact that the local government system is not effective as it should be. Again, the traditional system too, which is also very central at some point to mobilization, to creating awareness, to empowering people to take up some of this, is also largely non-existent. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, we need to tell ourselves the blank truth. We need to tell ourselves the blank truth. Sometimes we try to run away from the fact when they stare at us, but nobody will see what happened in Mokwa and say, well, they've not learned. That is enough education for everybody. The moment you see the community and the way it has been devastated, on TV, on social media. You know, this is something beyond individuals. This is something beyond communities. So there is need for communities, citizens, and governments to come together and ensure that this thing never happened again. And wherever it happened, that it is quickly contained to minimize loss of human lives, as well as loss of assets, and especially farmland. Because what people are not addressing right now is that
how that will affect food security.
Yes. How many farms have been impacted, and maybe the number of livestock lost, because our focus has always been on the most important component of the losses, which is the human lives. But if you look at the quantum, the hectares of land being washed by this flood, I think maybe people will have a rethink, and that is why there is need for relief material for those
affected.
Yes, because it's not what we are seeing on TV is loss of houses, maybe loss of 1 or 2 items in the house, but the key is actually the loss of crops
sources of livelihood.
The sources of livelihood. These people must live, and they are not living. They are not going to leave their land. I have heard some people saying that maybe they can be relocated. Our people don't want to be relocated.
Come into that issue of evacuation.
Yes. No. It is not in a country where poverty is about 70% or so. Relocating people to another place is going to pose a challenge, and you need to also consider. Right now, we have.
So what do you do in the circumstance?
Yes, we have
people in a clumsy area. I mean, keep coming with the IDP camps and what have you.
Yes. So it's not relocation.
Is that sustainable?
No, you can't sustain relocation of people. What you need to actually tap into is the indigenous intelligence that enable people to survive in that community for hundreds of years. They have been surviving these challenges. So if the funds are not there, if the technical know-how is not there, at least the people there, since they have been living by the riverside, they have been adapting to these challenges. So help them to adjust, to make the necessary adaptations, so that at least the damages, will be minimized when the next emergency comes.
Again, people are worried about how the authorities are prioritizing the needs. For instance, with what happened in Mokwa, the president, just gave directives, that the bridge linking Mokwa, the north and south, through Mokwa, it should be immediately, fixed. But it's not looking at the bigger picture. Now, we are talking about sources of livelihoods, homes, farmlands that have been affected and all of that. Why are we sometimes selective in terms of addressing the issues when we need to look at it holistically?
Yeah, you see, maybe that is an area where I may differ with you.
Right.
I could remember when there was a tremor at a place called Ikara in Kaduna, maybe if you remember.
The tremor,
Yeah, so the fact is that when an emergency like this happened, there are so many stakeholders, and every government, any MDA, will have to write a report to the president, because he is the leader. So everybody, the security agencies,
everybody send their reports.
Yes, they send in their report, and Mr. President, being the leader, will now study all these reports and their recommendations and make the judgment and prioritize, the activity that the government is supposed to intervene. I believe he's intervening within what information is actually available to him. You may be thinking that, there are other ways you can save more lives. Maybe if that is the first priority, that bridge, then the president should not shy away from taking that decision.
Okay. Yes. Even though some would say, between a bridge and homes, they are very critical at this point in time. When rainy season, people are living outside their homes and what have you. Families living in IDPs, in shanties, in open places, need also immediate intervention, for instance.
It's a multidimensional judgment, because sometimes, I've never been a political leader, but what I can tell you that having served in government is that when things happen, I realize that my own area is just a small area of responsibility. I wrote my report to His Excellency the Governor. Then you have SEMA will have to write, Ministry of Environment will write, Ministry of Water Resources will write, the Ministry for Social, Ministry of Health will equally write, Ministry of Transport will write. Now it depends depends on the competency and capacities and the content of those reports, because you may not actually be sharing information between, something like that. And
but shouldn't that be the right way to go? Because
sharing information, sharing information before the president is something that is very difficult for government agencies to be collaborating. You can see the challenge of the security framework in this country. They find it difficult to actually collaborate.
Sometimes rivalry will set in and what have you.
But at the presidential level, because everybody submit his report to the president will now look at it and say, okay, based on what is available to me, this is the way forward. That is why he's the president. So I believe that we should give him that
benefit of the doubt. Even though some are giving it political, they're reading political meaning to it.
No, but me, I believe that he has made the right judgment.
Okay.
I believe that because you don't have the information available to him. If you have, probably you too, you will make the same kind of
decision.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Talking about preventive measures, the need to address reoccurrence or to prevent occurrence elsewhere, and we talked about collaboration among the federal and the state governments, and then critical stakeholders. Okay. Largely, I mean, other factors also have to do with enforcement. We talked about the enforcement. Okay. What about awareness?
You see, awareness, the federal government has just dedicated some money to
national
awareness. But I believe awareness should be integrated into the framework of responsibilities of local government, and it should be domesticated in these environmental health officers, because you find them in every political ward. Imagine we have 774 local government. Now, if you break it into wards, the only government arm that has access to political ward in terms of environmental performance and even the flood awareness that you are talking of is these environmental health officers. There are thousands of them that are available, to service communities. But these people have not been functional for a while. Because
isn't it time now that the government is talking about providing jobs for the people, creating job opportunities? Shouldn't this be revived at the national level, for instance?
No, they are still employed.
So that it can go around. Let's say the government is saying, okay, at this time of emergency, we need so number. I've just seen some statistics of government trying to, do some things in terms of getting people employed. Okay, we have 774 local governments in Nigeria. Okay, take 1,000 health workers.
I can tell you,
or 500 health workers across local government.
The Kaduna South local government at some point has about 300 of them.
300,000?
No, 300 environmental health officers that we call Dubagari.
Yes.
But because they are not well funded, they are not empowered, so they just go to the office, sit down and collect salary. Seat warming has never been part of their jobs. Not when we are facing, multidimensional environmental challenges. So these people need to be identified, they need to be empowered.
It shouldn't be in a kind of ad hoc arrangement. It has to be a comprehensive arrangement that can be sustained.
What I'm beginning to think is that maybe when federal government is dishing out intervention, it should go directly to local government instead of states. That way, with a clear plan by the framework to be developed by the Minister of Environment to say, okay, this is how this money should be applied. So, and the Minister of Environment will now be monitoring the enforcement and performance of local governments in terms of flood risk mitigation and adaptation. We have this structure.
But how can
it's just that the funds are not there, and the political.
But in most cases, they will tell you that there's this political, interference. State governors will say, "Oh, why are you sidelining us? Why should you deal directly with the local government?"
No,
we've seen what is happening.
We have done that before.
We've seen what is happening even with the autonomy, the local government autonomy, for instance. Government said, "Okay, this money should go directly to the local governments," but the states, are putting up resistance.
Yes, that is where funds are being channeled in the constitutional way. Now, what we are advocating for is an intervention. An intervention can be dispensed of the way the federal government wants. Call the necessary.
We've seen even common rice distribution, palliatives, has to go through the local, has to go through the state government and then through the,
Well, you asked me for my own opinion. I believe that the Minister of Environment is up and doing. The Minister of Water Resources is up and doing, as well as the Minister of Health and other government agencies such as NESA, such as NIMET. So when you empower these agencies to collaborate with local government, you get a better result.
Yeah,
and right now, what we are looking for are the result that will not make Mokwa happen again. We don't want to see it again.
Right. Okay. That's a very, ambitious one. Some would say it's also doable. But looking at the challenges, the prevalent challenges, we've seen elsewhere.
I believe
it becomes very difficult.
I believe Mr. President and his ministers can do it.
Okay. Yes. So all they need perhaps is to come up with a comprehensive plan, and then how it's going to be
communicate with the local government. Communicate with the local government.
Right.
Every local government chairman, whether elected or not, they know the needs of their immediate needs of their communities and citizens. They cannot lie about that. Right. So where needs are identified at local level, give them the funds, let them give the contract at local level. But then at the federal level, monitor and ensure that national standards are complied with. Yes. Right. So that these things don't happen again.
Right. Okay. Let me get to your last line, talking about going forward, what need to be done, short term, medium term, and perhaps long term.
Yes. In the short term, where the plan is not being executed, what we have to do is a fire brigade approach. We just have to wait when something happens and then we respond. So what it means is the federal government has to actually, empower NEMA, because that's what NEMA is mandated to do, to respond to emergencies.
But that's being reactive. Why can't we be
you said
proactive?
Short term. Yes.
The immediate reaction.
Yes, immediate, because now, since we have not been proactive, we are responsive. So the best thing you can do first at the first level, first line of defense against this kind of emergencies, is to empower NEMA, so that at least where an emergency happens, the time it takes for them to respond can be shortened. Okay. Because if something like Mokwa is happening, the government at all levels should be able to respond in less than 1 hour. Yeah. So how they develop that is entirely their own game. Yeah. Then the next thing is the long-term measure, the mid-term. Yes. I believe that within a year, if government is putting up an intervention, the intervention should be under the federal ministers, and then they should call their relevant MDAs that should communicate directly with the local government and the environmental health officers. What are your needs in terms of preparedness? In terms of, preparedness, that is the short-term measure. Yes, because adaptation and mitigations are long-term. And that means that the ministries, MDAs need to go to their shelves and dust these national erosion, flood, and watershed policies.
Is it up to date? Because in most cases, you find out that some of these documents, also need to be revisited. Perhaps they are not capturing the realities of today.
But you see, ACRISAL is active and functional. If there are any area of flood vulnerability, if you need any updated information, you should be able to find it in ACRISAL. Now, whether they are funded to adequately address the challenge is what I don't know. But ACRISAL, even though it may have a limited coverage, but ACRISAL should actually be in every local government, and the government can use ACRISAL to ensure compliance with flood mitigations and adaptations. Yeah.
So talking about funding, which is very critical, at both federal and state level, how do you think this can be enhanced? We're talking about, blocking leakages, expanding access to funds, taking certain reforms to free monies for development. Some would say these are some of the areas that need to be targeted. So how do you think that this government, the tiers of government, can improve, on funding?
Well, you see, I'm not an expert in government finances. Right. My area of competence is environmental performance. That's right. What I can tell you is that if we rely on the federal budget to finance all environmental performance, we may not actually get the desired sustainability output. So we need to actually look outside government, outside the box. And the good thing about sustainability is that there is a room for partnership and community and citizens participation. So just like I mentioned Aikingaya, what Aikingaya can achieve is something maybe beyond individuals and even the local government, because people are committed
getting involved,
putting in their resources, putting in their sweat to ensure that at least some environmental outcomes are actually achieved. And in the country, we have the ecological fund, and the designers of our constitution and the political structure believe that we need something like ecological fund to mitigate against environmental emergencies such as this. Now, it is up to experts like me and you to ensure that the money that goes into ecological fund is dedicated to adaptations and mitigations of environmental challenges at community level. Where we have problem is that we have problem with deforestation, flooding, erosion, and you are giving the money to state, and you expect the state, that is an expectation. You expect that the money will not be shared, to vulnerable local government. At the end of the day, because the local government are already weak, they don't have the power to access money for the state. So the problem
probably there's also no checks and balances.
So the problem
how money
of governance,
is being expended.
The problem of governance, we should leave it to politicians. But we will keep advising them that these are the solutions. How the details of the solutions, they are political judgment that you should allow politicians to actually judge upon.
Right. Okay. Talking about the policy framework again, also, because that is the starting line. When we have policies that are not in tandem with the 21st century reality, especially those that captured what we're going through, globally, the climate change and all of that, we might not be able to get it right. You talk about something fundamental, the issue of deforestation. The effect, largely is also connected to what we are seeing today. Talk to me about, how much of that impact is contributing to the level of the climate change we are seeing today, especially in our own climate.
I think the biggest climate change mitigation and adaptation project in this country currently is the Great Green Wall, a $50 billion investment that is supposed to mitigate, protect, northern Nigeria against the Sahara. If you look at it, it cut across several countries in the West African sub-region. Now, the investment in that area, I believe, is what we need to replicate, especially in all northern states. I've been to states where you see woodlots, at local government level. Now, we need to see trees in every household. We need to see trees along every street. And then when you have a farm, and then you want to demarcate, you should use trees as border. This has been going on, but it's just that now you start wondering, what are the borders between my farm and your farm? Now that border should be made of what? Trees. And then within the farm itself, we need to encourage what we call agroforestry, where you can grow trees as well as crops together. These are the responsibilities of the Ministry of Agri, and I have seen sign of it in frontline states, being driven by IFAD, is also a development partner. But the problem is that we are not monitoring this kind of investment. If the federal government is taking loan in order to at least upgrade our forest reserve and agricultural productivity, there should be somebody to be monitoring performance, whether that investment is actually yielding the desired outcome. You cannot just take a loan and then leave the loan to those that have been given the responsibility to manage it. And especially you in the media, you need to be going to the communities and see and monitor how some of these government agencies, are actually working. I believe that will help.
Yeah, talking about, mitigating, some of those environmental issues, talking about felling of trees, again, the cost of energy substantially contribute to what we are seeing today. Quite a number of communities, quite a number of households, I find, may not be able to have, do not have the capacity or the financial wherewithal. Right, so you find out that they fall back to some of this in spite of the challenges. But how do we also enforce laws in this way? There are also laws preventing some of this.
Yes, that brings me to something that is very important that I need to mention to you. Based on the United Nations guidelines, you can assess governance based on SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal. The first goal there is poverty and hunger.
Right.
So where a country suffers from poverty and hunger, all the others cannot fall into place. So we need to fight.
That is the first set of priorities.
Yes. So look at SDG 7. That is if you want to measure good governance, these are the indices for measuring good governance. Where there is prevalence of hunger and poverty, what it means is that there's little or no governance. So let's fight poverty.
In our case, people are falling into multidimensional poverty, in quite numbers, in growing numbers.
Anything that you want to say, any risks that you can think of can happen. The moment there is hunger in the land and the moment there is poverty, people cannot afford the basic necessities. And we have been thinking of before, because initially they were MDGs, Millennium Development Goals.
Right.
But those goals have been upgraded now.
Yeah, we couldn't meet most of them, and then now they have been elevated.
So now what we have, we call them Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, they are domesticated in Federal Ministry of Planning and State Ministries of Planning so that they can monitor these indices. But I believe for the purpose of the communities that you serve and we serve, we need to monitor these indices just so that, to put the political class on their toes, so that these are the indices on which you are going to be judged.
Measure.
So measure it yourself before somebody measure it for you.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf Rigasa, for talking to us on daily politics. We really appreciate your perspectives and informed, understanding of the issues. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
And viewers, that's a wrap on today's edition of Daily Politics. We do hope you found the conversation engaging. Do join us. We'll be back with another interesting topic and personalities. Until then, on behalf of the technical crew, I'm Shafi'u Suleiman. Many thanks for being there.